As Pam mentioned today, I'm here to talk about American history, the Constitution from the perspective of an American history teacher. But just a quick thanks for all your support last year. I'm sorry we came up short, but we brought Maurice Hinchey to his knees. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had to come in to save him. Bill Clinton was in here. Steny Hoyer was in here. We're proud of our efforts. It was a great race, and it was a great tribute to your help here, so we're very thankful. Our family's doing well. We have a baby that's almost 4 months old now, little Michael. He's happy, he's smiling all the time, and I think I have the concern about him that all of us have here about our children and our grandchildren. What type of country are they growing up in? What country did our founders give us? This is a great moment here to learn what the true American principles are that our founders gave us, but what direction are we going in? And the theme of my talk today is looking at the Constitution through history. We become educated, we're educating others. I think we all know in this group now, Article 1, Section 8, what are the powers clearly defined from the federal government to the Congress? What can the Congress do? What was the federal government expected to do? And we know that it was very limited in scope and nature. We know the 10th Amendment said all those powers not given to the federal government were reserved to the states and to the people of the United States. The theme of my talk, and I'll just give a summary of it because I don't have my PowerPoint projection up here, is the Constitution through history. How did we come from this limited government that made the path for prosperity and freedom that the Founding Fathers gave us to Obamacare, to a $14 trillion national debt, to a government full of czars that were never elected by the American people? How did we get here? Well, let's look at the founding for a minute. And I want to just play off on something Pam mentioned here. In our history textbook, there's actually a term, Republican motherhood. If you look at some of the founding wives, Abigail Adams and others, they realized how special, how unique this government was that the founders gave us. And it was actually considered an obligation and a duty for families, mothers, fathers, to educate their children on the Constitution and on these principles of Republican government. So that's an actual term from our founding, Republican motherhood. And if you think about school in those days, there was a lot of homeschooling, small town schools. These principles were sacred. And Pam has the evidence here to speak to that. I wanted to mention just another figure who was from Ulster County, actually, that's incredibly important in this whole debate, and that was George Clinton. He was our first governor from New York State. He was buried in Kingston. And I can't cite this, but I've read something that he became at a very young age the Ulster County clerk and kept that position for over 50 years. So that means he would have had it when he was governor, when he was vice president of the United States, when he served in the military. I think that underscores something as well. That when you have a limited government that's not trying to be all things to all people, we had other officials serve in multiple positions at that point. George Clinton was actually an anti-federalist. He opposed the ratification of the Constitution because he thought that it went too far. He and Patrick Henry, who during the Revolution said, "Give me liberty or give me death," they both said, "Look, we are worried about a return to tyranny." Clinton only dropped his objections when we had the agreement for the Bill of Rights. And Pam is right that when 9 states ratified, it went into effect. But when the 9th state ratified, New Hampshire, we still had New York, we still had Virginia that had not ratified. And Clinton dropping his objections with that deal with the Bill of Rights coming in, that was essential for getting New York to ratify. How could we have a new country without New York, without Virginia, 2 of the key states in that day? So this is some of the mindset of the Founding Fathers. I think Franklin and Washington and Hamilton were right that we needed to go forward with the new Constitution. But let's not forget George Clinton. Let's not forget Patrick Henry, that we're still saying, hey, we have to protect these sacred rights, and they fought for those Bill of Rights. That was incredibly important. If you go through the first 100 years of American history, we actually did pretty well up until 1900, through the 1800s. The founders, the initial presidents remained fairly true to that mission. Let's take James Madison for a moment here, our 4th president of the United States. there was an effort at that point to get funding, federal funding for roads to help develop what was then the Old West, Indiana, Ohio. And what did the president say? Who's credited with drafting the Constitution at that convention? James Madison said, I think it's a splendid idea, but it's not in the Constitution. Amend the Constitution, and then I'll sign your bill into law for federal roads. How far have we come today in the era of pork barrel projects and all of this federal spending, and how much of that stimulus was laden with sheer pork pet projects for members of Congress? That's a very important point that I think we lost. The Founding Fathers said, look, there's problems that might come up that we can't foresee. Let's have an amendment process for it. Madison understood that as the 4th president of the United States. Another issue that came up that I want to relate today, we have enormous concerns about the Federal Reserve, the constitutionality of it, what they're doing with our money. An audit has been called for. What is going on with the Federal Reserve? Well, the precursor of that was the National Bank. And it was actually Hamilton who said, let's have a national bank. There was a huge debate in the founding. This is not specifically in the Constitution. The power to coin money is there. The idea to regulate interstate commerce is there, but nothing about a national bank. So that was actually abolished by Andrew Jackson. He did not renew the charter of the national bank. This was a debate that we had with us. Lincoln, for all his greatness, he would be seen in his day as being more liberal in terms of a reading of the Constitution. He actually said, yes, we need federal funding for a transcontinental railroad. And we know some of the issues that came up in the war. He said, look, our obligation to preserve the Union is so great, we're going to suspend habeas corpus and other rights. But even Lincoln, at that point, the Republican Party was the more liberal party, the Democrat Party was the conservative states' rights party. Even Lincoln said, the government should not do for others what they could do for themselves. This was a very important statement here. If you get past the end of the Civil War, really in the late 1800s, both parties were conservative parties. Government was still very, very limited to those powers described in the Constitution. The big issue was tariffs, because the only tax was on overseas goods. And President Cleveland, a Democrat president from New York State, was upset when the economy picked up a little bit and we were collecting too much in tariff revenues. And guess what he said? He said, I'm worried we're collecting too much money. We might start creating programs that are unconstitutional to spend the money on. Only 100 years ago, imagine that, a Democrat president worrying about spending too much money, worrying about new programs. That was 100 years ago. We had the progressive era in the early 1900s, and there were concerns. I think if we went around this audience here, we'd all say, yes, we're against child labor. And yes, I'm sure at that point in that history it had become a great concern. But the progressives ignored the process of constitutional amendment for so many of the issues they took on. They did push through an income tax amendment, and even if we go the amendment process, we have to be careful, because look at that amendment. Oh, it's only going to be a 1% tax on those making $5,000 a year or more. $5,000 was probably the equivalent of $80,000 today. And now look at us today. This complicated, oppressive tax code here that's stymieing our growth and taking money away from hardworking Americans. In other areas, they just ignored the constitutional amendment process, including with the Federal Reserve created in 1913, including some of the child labor laws and other things. Now, their argument was the Interstate Commerce Clause, saying, look, if a child is making shoes in Cleveland, Ohio, those shoes can be transported to Pennsylvania and New York, and we have the right to regulate interstate commerce. But that's a stretch. And look at today. They're trying to use interstate commerce to justify Obamacare. Now, that is a huge stretch. I know there might be a time as a citizen where for a special surgery or special procedure you have to go to Massachusetts or another state to a special hospital, but to say that this is interstate commerce, this is the precedent the progressives started in that era. And of course, the Democrat Party started to become the more liberal party at that point.